The screams echoed through the corridors of Blackwood Academy at exactly 3:47 a.m. on October 15, 1985. By morning, 10 students had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only empty beds and a mystery that would haunt the small town of Cedar Falls, Vermont, for nearly 4 decades. It was supposed to be just another quiet night at the prestigious boarding school nestled in the Green Mountains. Founded in 1892, Blackwood Academy had educated the children of America's elite for generations. Its Gothic stone buildings and manicured grounds projected an air of tradition and safety that parents paid handsomely to secure for their children. But that October night shattered everything. The first sign something was wrong came when 17-year-old Marcus Chen failed to appear for his usual 6 a.m. run around the campus perimeter. Marcus was the type of student who lived by routine: honor roll, student council president, and captain of the cross-country team. His roommate, David Walsh, initially thought nothing of it. Perhaps Marcus had overslept, something that rarely happened but wasn't impossible. However, when Marcus didn't show up for breakfast either, David grew concerned. He knocked on doors down the hallway, looking for his friend. That's when the horrible reality began to unfold. Room 247, empty. The beds of twins Jennifer and Jessica Morrison hadn't been slept in. Room 249, vacant. Sophia Rodriguez and her roommate Amanda Pierce were nowhere to be found. Room 251, deserted. The basketball star Jamal Washington and his quiet roommate Timothy Brooks had vanished. Room 253, abandoned. Theater enthusiast Rebecca Hamilton and aspiring writer Lisa Chen were gone. By the time David reached the end of the hallway, his hands were shaking. 10 students from the 3rd floor of Hartwell Dormitory had disappeared. Their belongings remained untouched. Clothes in closets, textbooks on desks, family photos on nightstands. It was as if they had simply evaporated into thin air. The school's headmaster, Dr. Edmund Whitmore, was awakened at 6:32 a.m. with the news. A tall, austere man in his 60s who had run Blackwood Academy with military precision for over 20 years, Dr. Whitmore prided himself on maintaining order and discipline. This was his worst nightmare. "Secure the building immediately," he ordered the security chief, Frank Morrison, who would later learn that his own daughters were among the missing. "No one enters or leaves until we find these children." The Vermont State Police arrived within the hour, led by Detective Sarah Mackenzie, a 15-year veteran who had seen her share of missing persons cases. But nothing had prepared her for the scene at Blackwood Academy. "In my entire career, I've never encountered anything like this," Detective Mackenzie would later tell reporters. 10 teenagers don't just vanish simultaneously without leaving some kind of trace. The initial investigation focused on the most logical explanations. Had the students run away together? Were they playing an elaborate prank? Had they been abducted by an outsider? The runaway theory was quickly dismissed. These weren't troubled kids from broken homes. Marcus Chen was set to graduate as valedictorian and had already been accepted to Harvard. The Morrison twins came from a loving family in Connecticut and had never shown any signs of wanting to leave school. Sophia Rodriguez was planning to study medicine and had spoken excitedly about her future just days before the disappearance. The prank theory seemed equally unlikely. While teenagers were certainly capable of elaborate jokes, this would require a level of coordination and secrecy that seemed impossible to maintain among 10 individuals. Moreover, several of the missing students barely knew each other. Marcus Chen ran in academic circles, while Jamal Washington was focused on sports. Rebecca Hamilton spent her time in the theater department, and Timothy Brooks was known as a loner who preferred books to people. That left abduction, but the logistics made no sense. How could someone kidnap 10 teenagers from a secure dormitory without anyone seeing or hearing anything? The building had strict security protocols, including locked exterior doors after 10 p.m. and resident advisors who conducted nightly checks. Detective Mackenzie began interviewing the remaining students and faculty members. The pattern that emerged was deeply unsettling. "Everything seemed normal that night," reported Jessica Torres, a senior who lived on the second floor of Hartwell Dormitory. "I was studying late, probably until around 2 a.m., and I didn't hear anything unusual. No voices, no footsteps, nothing." The resident advisor for the third floor, graduate student Michael Patterson, had conducted his nightly check at 11 p.m. as required. "Every room was accounted for," he insisted during his interview. "I saw all 10 of them. They were in their rooms, some studying, some getting ready for bed. Everything was completely normal." This testimony was crucial because it established a timeline. The students were present and accounted for at 11 p.m. but were discovered missing at 6:30 a.m. Somewhere in that 7.5-hour window, 10 teenagers had vanished. The investigation team expanded their search to the surrounding grounds. Blackwood Academy sat on 200 acres of wooded terrain, with hiking trails, a small lake, and numerous outbuildings. Search and rescue teams with dogs combed every inch of the property, looking for any sign of the missing students. They found nothing. The FBI joined the investigation on day 3, bringing federal resources and expertise in kidnapping cases. Special Agent Robert Hayes, who specialized in crimes involving multiple victims, established a command center in the school's library and began coordinating with local law enforcement. "This case has elements I've never seen before," Agent Hayes confided to Detective Mackenzie during their first strategy meeting. "The lack of physical evidence is unprecedented. It's as if these kids simply walked off the face of the earth." The media attention was immediate and intense. By the end of the first week, CNN, NBC, and every major newspaper in the country had reporters camped outside the school gates. The story captivated the nation. 10 bright, promising teenagers from affluent families had vanished from one of America's most exclusive boarding schools. The pressure on the investigation team was enormous. Parents demanded answers. The school's board of trustees threatened to fire Dr. Whitmore. Politicians called for a comprehensive review of boarding school safety protocols. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined every inch of the third floor of Hartwell Dormitory. They dusted for fingerprints, collected DNA samples, and used luminol to search for traces of blood. The results were frustratingly inconclusive. The only fingerprints belonged to the missing students and staff members who had legitimate reasons to be in the building. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of forced entry. "It's like they just walked out," forensic specialist Dr. Lisa Park reported to the investigation team. "But that doesn't make sense either, because all the exterior doors were locked and alarmed. Someone would have known if they had been opened." The psychological profiles of the missing students were equally puzzling. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist brought in to assist with the case, interviewed family members, friends, and teachers to build comprehensive profiles of each missing student. Marcus Chen, academically gifted, goal-oriented, no history of risk-taking behavior or mental health issues. His parents described him as the most responsible teenager they'd ever known. Jennifer and Jessica Morrison, identical twins with close family relationships. They were active in school activities and had never been in trouble. Their father, ironically, was the school's security chief. Sofia Rodriguez, ambitious pre-med student from a stable family in Texas. She had been planning to spend Thanksgiving break volunteering at a local hospital. Amanda Pierce, quiet but well-adjusted student from Oregon. She excelled in mathematics and had been accepted into an early admission program at MIT. Jamal Washington, star athlete with a bright future in college basketball. Multiple universities were recruiting him, and he was excited about his upcoming senior season. Timothy Brooks, introverted but academically strong. He came from old money in Boston and was expected to attend the family's alma mater, Yale University. Rebecca Hamilton, extroverted theater enthusiast from California. She had been cast as the lead in the school's upcoming production of Romeo and Juliet. Lisa Chen, no relation to Marcus despite sharing a surname. She was an aspiring writer who had already published short stories in several teen magazines. None of these profiles suggest a propensity for running away or engaging in risky behavior, Dr. Foster concluded in her report. These are stable, well-adjusted teenagers with bright futures ahead of them. The idea that they would willingly disappear is highly improbable. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to expand beyond the immediate circumstances of the disappearance. Detectives looked into the history of Blackwood Academy itself, searching for any clues that might explain the bizarre incident. What they found was a school with a generally clean record, but a few troubling incidents over the decades. In 1923, a student named Edward Thornton had fallen to his death from the bell tower under mysterious circumstances. In 1956, a fire had destroyed the original dining hall, killing a maintenance worker. In 1971, a female student had accused a teacher of inappropriate conduct, though the charges were never proven and the teacher had left quietly. Every old institution has its share of tragedies and controversies, Dr. Whitmore explained when pressed about the school's history. But nothing that would explain what happened to our students. Boo. The investigation also uncovered some unusual architectural features of the campus. Blackwood Academy had been built in stages over several decades, resulting in a complex layout with numerous additions, modifications, and renovations. The building plans on file with the local government didn't always match the actual structures, particularly in the basement and sub-basement areas. These old buildings have been modified so many times over the years that even we don't know all their secrets, admitted the school's maintenance supervisor, Harold Jennings, who had worked at Blackwood for over 30 years. There are rooms down in the basement that haven't been opened in decades. This revelation prompted a thorough search of the school's lower levels. Teams of investigators explored every basement room, storage area, and utility space they could find. They discovered forgotten classrooms from the school's early days, abandoned dark rooms from when photography was taught, and storage areas filled with decades of accumulated junk. But they found no trace of the missing students. As October turned to November, the investigation began to lose momentum. Despite the efforts of local police, state authorities, and federal agents, no concrete leads had emerged. The case was unlike anything in law enforcement textbooks. 10 people had simply vanished without leaving any evidence of their departure. The psychological toll on the school community was severe. The remaining students were traumatized and distracted. Several families pulled their children out of school, and enrollment for the following year was down dramatically. Faculty members were on edge, and some began looking for positions elsewhere. The missing students' families were devastated. They held vigils, hired private investigators, and pleaded with the media to keep the story alive. But as weeks passed with no new developments, public attention began to wane. "We can't give up," insisted Margaret Chen, Marcus's mother, during a tearful press conference 6 weeks after the disappearance. "These are our children. They're out there somewhere, and we need to find them." Detective Mackenzie shared the family's determination, but she was also realistic about the challenges they faced. "We've followed every lead, explored every theory, and examined every piece of evidence," she told her superiors. "At this point, we need something new, a witness, a piece of physical evidence, anything to move this case forward." That something new wouldn't come for 38 years. By Christmas of 1985, the active investigation had been scaled back, though the case remained officially open. The FBI agents returned to their other assignments, leaving Detective Mackenzie and a small team of state police officers to continue following up on tips and leads. Most of the tips were dead ends, reported sightings of the missing students in distant cities, conspiracy theories about government cover-ups, and claims from psychics who insisted they could locate the children through supernatural means. None led anywhere. The case gradually faded from national headlines, though it remained a source of fascination for amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Books were written, documentaries were produced, and internet forums dedicated to the mystery attracted thousands of members who proposed countless theories about what had happened that October night. Some theorized that the students had been abducted by a religious cult. Others suggested they had witnessed something they shouldn't have and were eliminated to protect powerful interests. The most outlandish theories involved alien abduction, time travel, and dimensional portals. But for all the speculation and investigation, one fact remained unchanged. 10 bright, promising teenagers had vanished without a trace from Blackwood Academy on October 15, 1985. Their fate remained one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The school itself struggled to recover from the tragedy. Enrollment dropped significantly, and the Board of Trustees was forced to make difficult financial decisions to keep the institution operating. Dr. Whitmore retired early, replaced by a younger administrator who tried to modernize the school and distance it from the dark events of 1985. Hartwell Dormitory was closed indefinitely. The third floor, where the missing students had lived, was sealed off and declared off-limits to everyone except maintenance personnel conducting essential repairs. Over the years, the building fell into disrepair, its empty windows staring out over the campus like hollow eyes. For the families of the missing students, life became divided into before and after October 15, 1985. Some moved away, unable to bear living in communities where they were constantly reminded of their loss. Others stayed, hoping their children might someday return. Support groups formed and disbanded. Private investigators were hired and fired. Reward funds were established and eventually donated to charities when it became clear they wouldn't be needed. Detective Mackenzie kept the case files in her office for years after her official retirement, occasionally pulling them out to review witness statements and evidence reports, looking for something she might have missed. She never found it. The maintenance supervisor, Harold Jennings, sometimes walked through the sealed sections of Hartwell Dormitory during his evening rounds. He claimed he could feel the presence of the missing students, as if they were still there, just beyond perception. "They're here somewhere," he would tell his wife after particularly unsettling nights at the school. "I can sense them, but I can't figure out where." The local community of Cedar Falls was forever changed by the events at Blackwood Academy. The small Vermont town had been proud of its prestigious boarding school and the distinguished visitors it brought to the area. After the disappearances, Cedar Falls became known primarily as the place where 10 teenagers had vanished mysteriously. Tourism actually increased, with curious visitors coming to see the school and hear stories about the missing students. Local businesses learned to cater to these dark tourists, selling T-shirts and souvenirs related to the mystery. It was an uncomfortable way to make money, but the economic benefits were undeniable. As the years passed, some people began to forget the details of the case. New residents moved to Cedar Falls without knowing its history. Young people grew up hearing only fragments of the story, but for those who had been there in 1985, the memory remained vivid and painful. The school's current students, decades later, sometimes claim to see figures in the windows of the abandoned Hartwell Dormitory or hear voices calling out from the sealed third floor. Whether these reports represented genuine supernatural phenomena or simply the power of suggestion was impossible to determine. What was certain was that the mystery of the 10 missing students had become part of Blackwood Academy's identity, as integral to its character as its Gothic architecture and academic traditions. New students learned the story during their first weeks on campus, usually from older students who delighted in frightening their younger peers with tales of the vanishing. Faculty members were more reluctant to discuss the case, having been instructed by successive administrations to avoid bringing unnecessary attention to the tragedy. But among themselves, in private moments, they sometimes wondered what really happened that October night and whether the truth would ever be revealed. The answer to that question lay hidden beneath their feet, in spaces that wouldn't be discovered for nearly 4 decades. As 1985 drew to a close, the case of the missing Blackwood Academy students joined the ranks of America's great unsolved mysteries, alongside the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and the identity of D.B. Cooper. It would remain there, frustrating investigators and captivating the public imagination, until a chance discovery in 2023 finally began to unlock the secrets that had been buried for 38 long years. But that discovery was still decades away, and in the winter of 1985, the only certainty was uncertainty. 10 bright young lives had been cut short or dramatically altered, 10 families had been shattered, and a prestigious institution had been forever marked by tragedy. The case files would gather dust, the reward posters would fade, and the empty rooms in Hartwell Dormitory would remain silent. But somewhere, somehow, the truth was waiting to be uncovered. It would take 38 years, but eventually it would be. Detective Maria Santos had never expected to inherit America's most famous cold case when she transferred to the Vermont State Police's Major Crimes Unit in January 2023. But there it was, sitting in a banker's box on her new desk, the complete case file for the Blackwood Academy disappearances. 38 years cold and still generating tips from amateur investigators around the world. Every detective who's worked this unit has taken a crack at it, explained Lieutenant Commander James Walsh, who had been David Walsh's younger brother, David being the roommate who first discovered the students were missing. Some get obsessed, some give up after a few weeks, but nobody's been able to crack it. Santos, a 15-year veteran who had built her reputation solving impossible cases in Boston, approached the Blackwood files with fresh eyes and modern technology that hadn't been available to the original investigators. She began by digitizing every document, photograph, and piece of evidence, creating a comprehensive database that could be searched and cross-referenced in ways that paper files never allowed. What she found intrigued her immediately. There were gaps in the original investigation, Santos would later explain to her superiors. Not because the detectives weren't thorough, they were excellent investigators working with the tools available in 1985, but they didn't have ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, or advanced architectural scanning technology. The breakthrough came in March 2023 when Santos decided to conduct a complete structural analysis of Blackwood Academy using modern surveying equipment. The school's current administration, eager to finally put the mystery to rest, granted full access to the campus. Working with a team from the Vermont Archaeological Survey, Santos began mapping the school's buildings using LiDAR technology and ground-penetrating radar. The results revealed something that had been missed for nearly 4 decades. Significant discrepancies between the architectural plans and the actual structure of Hartwell Dormitory. The building's foundation showed void spaces that shouldn't exist according to any of the blueprints on file, explained Dr. Jennifer Park, the lead archaeologist on the project. There were clearly additional spaces beneath the dormitory that had been sealed off or hidden at some point in the building's history. The discovery prompted a more intensive investigation of the dormitory's basement levels. Using thermal imaging cameras, the team identified temperature variations in specific sections of the basement walls that suggested hollow spaces beyond. On March 15, 2023, almost exactly 38 years after the original disappearances, the investigation team made a discovery that would change everything. While examining the basement beneath the kitchen of Hartwell Dormitory, Santos noticed that one section of stone wall appeared newer than the surrounding masonry. The mortar between the stones was a slightly different color, and the thermal imaging showed a significant temperature differential behind that particular wall. Something was definitely behind there, Santos recalled. The question was whether we had legal authority to break through a wall in a historic building, based on what amounted to educated guesswork. The legal authorization came through within days, thanks to pressure from the families of the missing students and the school's administration, both of whom were desperate for closure after decades of uncertainty. On March 22, 2023, a team of investigators, archaeologists, and forensic specialists gathered in the basement of Hartwell Dormitory. Using carefully controlled demolition techniques to preserve any potential evidence, they began breaking through the newer section of wall. What they found behind it shocked everyone present. A tunnel, a carefully constructed passageway that extended from the basement of Hartwell Dormitory in a direction that the original investigators had never explored. The tunnel was approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, lined with the same stone that had been used in the dormitory's construction, suggesting it had been built around the same time as the building itself in the early 1900s. This wasn't some hastily dug escape route, explained construction engineer Michael Torres, who was brought in to assess the tunnel's structural integrity. This was professional masonry work, built to last. Someone had invested significant time, money, and expertise in creating this hidden passage. The tunnel extended approximately 200 yards from the dormitory, running beneath the campus grounds in a direction that led toward the wooded area behind the school's athletic fields. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Inside the tunnel, the investigation team found evidence that it had been used recently, specifically around the time of the 1985 disappearances. Forensic specialist Dr. Amanda Foster, daughter of the psychologist who had worked the original case, identified several crucial pieces of evidence within the tunnel, fabric fibers that matched clothing worn by some of the missing students, strands of hair that preliminary DNA analysis suggested could belong to the victims. Most importantly, personal items that had definitely belonged to the missing teenagers. Marcus Chen's class ring, engraved with his initials and graduation year. A silver bracelet that Jennifer Morrison had been wearing the night she disappeared, identified by her father through photographs. A page torn from a notebook, covered in handwriting that matched samples from Rebecca Hamilton's school assignments. These items proved that the missing students had been in this tunnel, Santos explained to the media during a carefully controlled press conference. But they also raised new questions about what had happened to them and where they had gone. The tunnel appeared to have been sealed from the inside, with the newer masonry work blocking the entrance from the basement. This suggested that whoever was responsible for the disappearances had taken great care to hide the evidence of their crime. But the tunnel didn't end in the basement of Hartwell Dormitory. Following its path using ground-penetrating radar, the investigation team discovered that it extended much further than they had initially realized, connecting to a complex network of underground passages that honeycombed the area beneath Blackwood Academy. "We're dealing with something much larger than a simple escape route," Dr. Park explained to the investigation team. "This appears to be part of an extensive underground system that may date back to the school's founding or even earlier." Historical research into the area's past revealed some intriguing possibilities. The land where Blackwood Academy was built had previously been owned by the Hartwell family, prominent Vermont residents who had made their fortune in the lumber industry during the late 1800s. The Hartwells were known to have built an elaborate mansion on the property, complete with servant quarters, stables, and various outbuildings. When the family lost their fortune in the financial panic of 1893, they sold the land to the founders of Blackwood Academy, who demolished most of the existing structures to build their school. However, some of the original foundation work and underground infrastructure had apparently been incorporated into the new construction. The Hartwells were known for their paranoia about labor disputes and social unrest, explained local historian Dr. Robert Mitchell. They built their estate with multiple escape routes and hidden passages in case they ever needed to flee quickly. It's entirely possible that some of these passages survived the demolition and became part of the school's hidden infrastructure. Further exploration of the tunnel system revealed additional chambers and passages, some of which showed evidence of more recent use. In one chamber, approximately 300 yards from the dormitory, investigators found what appeared to be a makeshift living space, mattresses, blankets, canned food, and other supplies that suggested someone had been hiding underground for an extended period. Carbon dating and forensic analysis of the materials suggested they had been placed there sometime in the mid-1980s, consistent with the timeline of the student disappearances. Someone was definitely living down there, Santos concluded. The question was whether it was the missing students themselves or someone else entirely. DNA analysis of hair and fabric samples found in the underground chambers provided some answers, but also raised new questions. The samples confirmed that several of the missing students had been in the underground system, but the evidence suggested they hadn't been there long. Based on the limited biological evidence we found, it appears the students were in these tunnels for a matter of days or weeks, not months or years, explained forensic biologist Dr. Sarah Kim. But that timeline creates its own mysteries about what happened to them afterward. The investigation team also discovered that the tunnel system extended beyond the school grounds entirely, with passages leading toward the nearby town of Cedar Falls and the surrounding wooded areas. Some of these tunnels appeared to connect to natural cave systems in the Vermont hills, creating a vast underground network that could provide undetected travel across miles of terrain. This discovery fundamentally changed the investigators' understanding of the 1985 disappearances. Rather than being trapped on the school grounds or abducted by outsiders, the missing students appeared to have been moved through an elaborate underground system that the original investigators never knew existed. But by whom and why? The answers to those questions lay in additional evidence found deeper in the tunnel system, evidence that would challenge everything people thought they knew about the case. In the chamber nearly half a mile from Hartwell Dormitory, investigators found a collection of documents and personal items that painted a disturbing picture of what had really happened in October 1985. Handwritten journals, apparently kept by someone who had been involved in the disappearances, maps of the tunnel system with various routes marked and timed, lists of supplies and equipment. Most chillingly, detailed profiles of each of the 10 missing students, including their schedules, habits, and personal relationships. This wasn't a random crime, Santos realized as she reviewed the evidence. Someone had been planning this for months, possibly years. They knew these students' routines, they knew the school's security procedures, and they had extensive knowledge of the underground system. The journals were particularly revealing. Written in a careful, educated hand, they detailed a complex plan to remove the students from the school without detection and transport them to a location where they could be held indefinitely. But held for what purpose? The journal's author never explicitly stated their motivations, but several entries suggested they believed they were protecting the students from some unspecified threat. "The children are in danger," read one entry dated September 15, 1985, exactly 1 month before the disappearances. "The corruption runs deeper than anyone realizes. They must be removed from harm's way before it's too late." Other entries described elaborate preparations for what the author called the extraction. They had stockpiled food, medical supplies, and educational materials in various underground chambers. They had tested routes through the tunnel system and timed how long it would take to move 10 people through the passages without detection. Most disturbing were the entries that described surveillance of the students themselves. The author had clearly been watching the teenagers for weeks, learning their habits and routines, identifying the best times and methods for taking them. Marcus stays up late, studying every Sunday night. Lights out by 1 a.m. usually. The Morrison twins always talk to their parents on Thursday evenings. They'll be missed quickly if they disappear on a Thursday. Jamal has basketball practice every Tuesday and Thursday. He's strongest and most likely to resist. Plan accordingly. The level of detail was both impressive and terrifying. Whoever had planned the disappearances had invested enormous time and effort in ensuring their success. But the journals also revealed something unexpected, genuine concern for the students' welfare. The author frequently wrote about their desire to protect the children and ensure their safety and comfort during what they called their temporary relocation. This wasn't a traditional kidnapping motivated by ransom or malice, Santos concluded after reviewing all the evidence. The perpetrator seemed to genuinely believe they were saving these kids from something. The question is, saving them from what? Additional evidence found in the tunnels provided some clues to the author's identity and possible motivations. Personal items suggested the perpetrator was someone with intimate knowledge of Blackwood Academy's operations and access to areas that would normally be restricted. A faculty identification badge from the 1984-1985 school year, though the photo and name had been deliberately obscured. Keys that matched locks throughout the school, including master keys that would only be available to senior staff. Documents that appeared to be copies of confidential school records, including disciplinary reports and medical files for various students. "We're looking at an inside job," Santos explained to her team. Someone who worked at the school, had access to sensitive information, and was able to move around the campus without attracting suspicion. The investigation team began reviewing personnel records from 1985, looking for anyone who might match the profile of someone capable of planning and executing such an elaborate scheme. They were looking for someone with extended access to the school buildings and grounds, knowledge of the students' personal information and schedules, possible knowledge of the underground tunnel system, the physical capability to move 10 teenagers through narrow passages, a psychological motivation to protect the students from perceived threats. The list of potential suspects was surprisingly short. Most faculty and staff members had solid alibis for the night of the disappearances, and many lacked either the physical capability or the psychological profile to carry out such a complex operation. But one name kept appearing in their investigation: Dr. Harold Blackwood, the elderly grandson of the school's founder, who had served as the institution's unofficial historian and archivist until his death in 1987. Dr. Blackwood had been in his 70s at the time of the disappearances, which initially seemed to rule him out as a suspect. But further investigation revealed that he had been an expert on the school's architecture and infrastructure, including knowledge of historical plans and modifications that other staff members didn't possess. He had also been deeply troubled by what he perceived as moral decay in modern society, and had frequently written and spoken about his belief that young people needed to be protected from corrupting influences. Blackwood was obsessed with preserving innocence, explained Dr. Foster, who had reviewed his published writings and personal papers. He believed that modern society was fundamentally corrupting to young minds, and that drastic measures might be necessary to protect exceptional children from that corruption. More significantly, Dr. Blackwood had been one of the few people who might have known about the underground tunnel system. As the family historian, he had access to original architectural plans and family documents that revealed the existence of the passages built by his ancestors. He had motive, means, and opportunity, Santos concluded. The question is whether a man in his 70s could have physically managed to move 10 teenagers through underground tunnels. The answer to that question came from an unexpected source. A confession letter found hidden in Dr. Blackwood's personal library, sealed in an envelope marked to be opened only in the event of discovery. The letter, dated October 20th, 1985, 5 days after the disappearances, provided a full account of what had really happened that October night and the fate of the 10 missing students. But that revelation would wait for the investigation team to process all the evidence they had found in the tunnels and prepare for what would be the most shocking conclusion to a cold case in American criminal history. The discovery of the tunnel system had answered some questions about how the students had disappeared, but it had also raised new and more disturbing questions about why they had been taken and what had ultimately happened to them. The truth, when it finally emerged, would be stranger and more tragic than anyone had imagined. As summer 2023 approached, Detective Santos and her team prepared to reveal their findings to the world. The families of the missing students, who had waited 38 years for answers, were about to learn the truth about their children's fate. It would not be the reunion they had hoped for, but it would finally be closure. The hidden tunnels beneath Blackwood Academy had kept their secrets for nearly 4 decades, but secrets, no matter how well buried, have a way of eventually coming to light. The final chapter of the Blackwood Academy mystery was about to be written. The confession letter that would finally solve America's most enduring missing persons case sat in an evidence locker for 3 weeks, while Detective Maria Santos and her team prepared for its contents. Found hidden behind a false wall in Dr. Harold Blackwood's personal study, the sealed envelope bore a warning that had kept it hidden for 38 years. To be opened only in the event of discovery. On June 15, 2023, in the presence of FBI agents, Vermont State Police officials, representatives from the families of the missing students, and Blackwood Academy's current administration, Detective Santos carefully opened the envelope that contained the truth about what happened on October 15, 1985. The letter, written in Dr. Blackwood's distinctive handwriting and dated 5 days after the disappearances, began with words that immediately changed everyone's understanding of the case. If you are reading this, then my great endeavor has been discovered, and I am likely dead. What I did for love, love of innocence, love of purity, and love of 10 extraordinary young souls who deserved better than the world had planned for them. Dr. Harold Blackwood's confession revealed a plan far more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined, but it also revealed something that would shock the families and investigators even more than the crime itself. The students hadn't died that October night. They had lived for years in the underground chambers beneath Blackwood Academy, hidden from the world by a man who believed he was saving them from corruption and harm. The letter continued, I have watched these children for 2 years, studying their potential, their purity, their exceptional gifts. Marcus Chen, destined for Harvard, but certain to be corrupted by the moral bankruptcy of modern academia. The Morrison twins, innocent and bright, but already showing signs of the vanity and materialism that destroys young women. Sofia Rodriguez, brilliant and compassionate, but headed for a medical profession that has lost its soul to greed and politics. Dr. Blackwood's twisted worldview became clear as the confession continued. He believed that exceptional young people were being systematically corrupted by modern society, and that only by removing them from that influence could their true potential be preserved. I have created for them a sanctuary, the letter explained, deep beneath the school, in chambers my great-grandfather built for different purposes. I have constructed a perfect world. They have books, art supplies, musical instruments, and educational materials carefully selected to nurture their gifts without the poison of contemporary influence. They have nutritious food, comfortable living spaces, and most importantly, they have each other, a community of pure souls untainted by the outside world. The investigation team exchanged shocked glances as Santos continued reading. The implications were staggering. If Blackwood was telling the truth, the students had been alive for years after their disappearance, living in an underground prison that their captor genuinely believed was paradise. The letter provided detailed descriptions of the underground facility that Blackwood had spent years constructing and perfecting. Using the original tunnel system built by his ancestor, he had created an elaborate subterranean complex complete with living quarters, a library, art studios, and even a small chapel. Each child has their own private room, decorated according to their personal interests and needs, the confession explained. Marcus has a study filled with classical literature and philosophy. Rebecca has a theater space where she can practice her performances. Jamal has an exercise area where he can maintain his physical conditioning. I have thought of everything necessary for their happiness and development. But the letter also revealed the darker aspects of Blackwood's plan. The students had not gone willingly. On the night of October 15, 1985, he had used a mild sedative gas pumped through the dormitory's ventilation system to render them unconscious. Working with the help of two accomplices, former students who had graduated years earlier and had been recruited to his cause, he had transported the unconscious teenagers through the tunnel system to their underground prison. They were confused and frightened at first, Blackwood admitted in his letter. But I explained to them the dangers they faced in the outside world and the opportunities I was offering them. Some accepted their situation more readily than others. Marcus, always the intellectual, understood the philosophical basis for what I was doing. Rebecca appreciated the artistic opportunities I could provide. Others took longer to adjust. The confession revealed that Blackwood had planned to keep the students underground for several years, until they reached an age where he believed they would be mature enough to resist the corrupting influences of modern society. He had created an elaborate educational curriculum for them, complete with lessons in literature, science, art, music, and what he called moral philosophy. They are receiving an education far superior to anything the outside world could offer, he wrote. Free from the distractions of television, popular music, social pressures, and materialistic concerns, they are developing into the extraordinary human beings they were meant to become. But the letter also contained a revelation that would change everything the investigators thought they knew about the case's timeline. Dr. Blackwood had not acted alone, and his plan had not proceeded as smoothly as he had hoped. My accomplices, whom I had trusted completely, betrayed both me and the children, the confession continued. Robert Hayes and Michael Patterson, both former students who had seemed to understand my vision, revealed themselves to be motivated by greed rather than idealism. Robert Hayes and Michael Patterson, the investigation team realized with shock that these were not random names. Robert Hayes was the same FBI agent who had worked the original case in 1985. Michael Patterson was the graduate student who had served as resident advisor on the third floor of Hartwell Dormitory and had been the last person to see the students before their disappearance. The implications were staggering. The FBI agent investigating the case had actually been one of the perpetrators. The resident advisor who had vouched for the students' presence at 11 p.m. had been part of the conspiracy to abduct them. The letter revealed how this betrayal had unfolded. Hayes and Patterson convinced me that keeping the children underground indefinitely was too risky. They proposed an alternative plan to transport the students to a remote location where they could be held more securely while still receiving the protected education I envisioned. I was reluctant, but they argued persuasively about the dangers of discovery if we remained at the school. According to Blackwood's confession, in November 1985, just 3 weeks after the disappearances, Hayes and Patterson had convinced him to move the students from the underground chambers to a compound they claimed to have prepared in the mountains of northern Vermont. They said they had found the perfect location, an abandoned hunting lodge with no neighbors for miles, completely off the grid, but comfortable and secure. They convinced me it would be better for the children's psychological health to have access to sunlight and fresh air while still being protected from outside influence. But when the time came for the transfer, something had gone terribly wrong. I should have known something was amiss when they insisted I remain behind to secure the underground facility while they transported the children, Blackwood wrote. They said it was for security reasons, that too many adults traveling together would attract attention. I trusted them completely, and that trust cost those beautiful souls their lives. The confession letter revealed that Hayes and Patterson had never intended to continue Blackwood's idealistic experiment. They had been planning from the beginning to eliminate the evidence of their involvement, including the students themselves. When Hayes returned alone the next morning, he told me there had been an accident. A fire at the mountain compound had claimed all 10 children before they could be rescued. He showed me photographs of the burned building and what he claimed were their remains. He said we had to keep the secret to protect ourselves from murder charges. But Blackwood had grown suspicious of his accomplice's story, especially when he realized they were actively sabotaging the official investigation. Hayes, as the FBI agent on the case, was in a perfect position to misdirect the search efforts and ensure that certain evidence was never discovered. I began to suspect that Hayes and Patterson had murdered the children deliberately, the letter continued. Perhaps they had never believed in my vision and had simply seen an opportunity for personal gain. Perhaps they had planned to demand ransom money from the families, but decided it was safer to eliminate the witnesses. I will never know their true motivations, but I'm certain that those innocent children died because of my poor judgment in trusting the wrong people. The confession letter revealed that Blackwood had spent the remaining months of his life tormented by guilt and fear. He had wanted to expose Hayes and Patterson, but had no proof of their crimes and knew that his own involvement would result in a murder conviction. I am dying now, the letter concluded. Cancer of the liver, the doctors tell me. Perhaps it is God's judgment for my sins. I go to my grave, knowing that I failed those children completely. I tried to save them from corruption and instead delivered them to death. If this letter is ever found, I pray that it will finally bring justice for Marcus, Jennifer, Jessica, Sophia, Amanda, Jamal, Timothy, Rebecca, and Lisa. They deserve so much better than what I gave them. The letter was signed and dated October 20th, 1985, with a postscript added in shakier handwriting. Hayes knows I suspect him. If something happens to me before my natural death, he is responsible. Dr. Harold Blackwood had died in March 1987, officially of liver cancer, though the confession letter raised questions about whether his death had been as natural as it appeared. Detective Santos and her team sat in stunned silence as the implications of the confession sank in. The case they thought they had been solving was actually part of a much larger conspiracy involving law enforcement corruption and multiple murders. But the confession also provided crucial information about where the students' remains might be found. Blackwood had included detailed directions to the mountain compound where Hayes and Patterson had claimed to take the children, along with geographic landmarks that would help modern investigators locate the site. Within hours of reading the confession, search teams were dispatched to the remote area of northern Vermont that Blackwood had described. Using GPS coordinates derived from his handwritten directions, they located the remains of what had indeed been a hunting lodge, burned to its foundations decades earlier. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple grave sites in the woods surrounding the burned building. Over the next 3 days, forensic teams carefully excavated the area and recovered the remains of 10 individuals who preliminary analysis suggested were consistent with the missing Blackwood Academy students. The remains told a horrifying story. Forensic examination revealed that the students had not died in a fire as Hayes and Patterson had claimed to Blackwood. They had been shot, execution style, and buried in shallow graves. Carbon dating confirmed that their deaths had occurred in late 1985, consistent with Blackwood's timeline. More disturbing was evidence that some of the students had been held captive for weeks before their murders. Rope marks on bones suggested they had been restrained for extended periods. The condition of their remains indicated they had been malnourished and possibly tortured before their deaths. These children suffered terribly before they died. Dr. Kim, the forensic anthropologist, reported to the investigation team. This wasn't a quick execution. They were held, abused, and eventually murdered by people who showed no mercy whatsoever. DNA analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains were those of the 10 missing Blackwood Academy students. After 38 years, their families finally had confirmation of their fate, though it was not the closure they had hoped for. The revelation of law enforcement corruption in the original investigation prompted a massive review of the 1985 case files. FBI Internal Affairs discovered that Robert Hayes had indeed manipulated evidence and misdirected the investigation to protect himself and his accomplice. Hayes had died in 2003, taking his secrets to the grave. But Michael Patterson was still alive, living under an assumed name in Oregon, where he had built a new life as a high school teacher. On July 4, 2023, Patterson was arrested at his home and charged with 10 counts of kidnapping and murder. Faced with the overwhelming evidence from Blackwood's confession and the forensic analysis of the students' remains, he finally confessed to his role in the crimes. Patterson's confession filled in the remaining details of what had happened to the students after they were taken from Blackwood Academy. He confirmed that he and Hayes had never believed in Blackwood's idealistic vision and had seen the elderly man's plan as an opportunity for financial gain. "We figured the families would pay anything to get their kids back," Patterson admitted during his interrogation. The plan was to keep them hidden for a few weeks, then demand ransom money. But Dr. Blackwood was so convinced he was saving them that he wouldn't listen to reason about letting them go. When Blackwood refused to cooperate with their ransom scheme, Hayes and Patterson had decided to eliminate all witnesses to their crimes. They had convinced Blackwood to let them move the students, then transported them to the remote mountain compound where they were held for 3 weeks before being murdered. It was Hayes's idea to kill them, Patterson claimed, trying to minimize his own responsibility. He said it was too risky to let them live. They could identify us, and they knew too much about what had happened. He said we had to clean up the mess. Patterson's account of the students' final weeks was heartbreaking. The teenagers had initially hoped they were being rescued when Hayes and Patterson moved them from the underground chambers. They had cooperated fully, believing they were finally going home to their families. "They were so happy when we told them we were taking them away from the crazy old man," Patterson recalled. "They thought we were FBI agents who had come to save them. They trusted us completely." That trust had been betrayed in the cruelest possible way. Once the students realized they were not being rescued, but were instead being held for ransom, some had tried to escape. Those attempts had been met with increasing violence from their captors. Marcus Chen, the honor student who had been planning to attend Harvard, had tried to organize the other students into a group escape attempt. For his leadership efforts, he'd been beaten and isolated from the others. The Morrison twins had tried to comfort the younger students and maintain morale during their captivity. Their kindness had been rewarded with psychological torture designed to break their spirits. Jamal Washington, the athlete, had made multiple escape attempts and had been physically restrained for the final week of his life. They never gave up hope, Patterson admitted. Even at the end, they were planning and scheming and trying to find ways to get word to their families. They were remarkable kids. They deserved so much better. The news of the discovery and the arrests made headlines around the world. The Blackwood Academy case, which had captured public attention for decades, finally had its resolution, though it was far more tragic than anyone had imagined. For the families of the missing students, the revelation brought a complex mixture of grief and relief. They finally knew what had happened to their children, but the knowledge came with the terrible understanding of how much their loved ones had suffered. Margaret Chen, Marcus's mother, spoke for many of the families when she addressed the media. "We always hoped we would find them alive, even after all these years. Learning that they died so young and in such a terrible way is heartbreaking. But we're grateful to finally know the truth and to be able to lay them to rest properly." The students were buried in a memorial cemetery created specifically for them on the grounds of Blackwood Academy. The school, which had struggled with the mystery for decades, used the resolution as an opportunity to create a scholarship fund in the students' names and to establish new safety protocols to ensure such a tragedy could never happen again. Dr. Whitmore, the former headmaster who had led the school during the crisis, was still alive at 98 and issued a statement expressing his relief that the truth had finally been revealed. "These students and their families deserved justice, and I'm grateful that Detective Santos and her team never gave up the search for answers." The underground tunnel system beneath Blackwood Academy was permanently sealed, but not before being thoroughly documented by historians and archaeologists. The chambers where the students had been held were preserved as a memorial, with plaques honoring each of the 10 victims. Michael Patterson was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, he faced the families of his victims and offered what many considered an inadequate apology. "I was young and stupid and made terrible choices. I've lived with the guilt every day for 38 years. I know nothing I say can bring your children back or undo the pain I've caused." The case also prompted significant changes in how missing persons investigations are conducted, with new protocols for background checking investigators and better oversight of federal agents working on local cases. Detective Santos, who had inherited a cold case and solved one of America's most famous mysteries, was promoted and received numerous awards for her work. But she remained focused on the families and the victims rather than her own recognition. "Those 10 students were failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them," she said during the final press conference on the case. Dr. Blackwood thought he was saving them, but put them in danger. Hayes and Patterson betrayed their trust in the most brutal way possible. The least we could do was make sure the truth finally came to light. The Blackwood Academy case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of questioning those who claim to act in others' best interests. It also demonstrated the power of modern forensic technology to solve cases that had seemed hopeless for decades. In the end, the discovery of the hidden tunnel had indeed revealed the truth about what happened to 10 bright, promising teenagers on that October night in 1985. It was not the truth their families had hoped for, but it was truth nonetheless. And after 38 years of uncertainty, truth was what they needed most. The empty rooms in Hartwell Dormitory, sealed for so many years, were finally reopened and converted into a memorial library where students could study and reflect on the importance of safety, trust, and the precious nature of young life. The mystery that had haunted Blackwood Academy for nearly 4 decades was finally solved. The 10 students who had vanished without a trace had been found at last, and their story, tragic though it was, could finally be told in full. Marcus Chen, Jennifer Morrison, Jessica Morrison, Sophia Rodriguez, Amanda Pierce, Jamal Washington, Timothy Brooks, Rebecca Hamilton, and Lisa Chen had not been forgotten. Their memory lived on in the hearts of their families, in the scholarships that bore their names, and in the determination of investigators like Detective Santos to never give up on finding the truth. The tunnel beneath Blackwood Academy was empty now, its secrets finally revealed. But the legacy of the 10 students who had once been hidden there would endure, serving as a reminder that every missing person deserves to be found, every family deserves answers, and every life, no matter how brief, has value that transcends time. The case was closed, but the memory remained, and in the end, that memory would prove to be more powerful than any secret, deeper than any tunnel, and more enduring than any attempt to hide the truth.